"Ma'am, please cooperate with us or we'll have no choice but to restrain you," the man in medical scrubs stated in a firm tone, tightening his grip around my arm. My chest tightened as panic surged through me. I struggled against him, heart thudding, eyes darting around in desperation. What is going on? Why are they doing this to me? I silently screamed the questions, scanning the room for Nathaniel, for anyone who might make sense of this. But all I saw were unfamiliar faces, cold and detached, pulling me from my own home as if I had committed some unforgivable crime. My name is Charlotte Anderson. I am 32 years old. Until a few weeks ago, I believed the worst moment of my life was receiving the devastating news of my father's death, Joshua Anderson, the man who meant the world to me, lost in a tragic plane accident. He had always been my pillar of strength, my protector, and the last family I had left. But that morning, when I was forced into an unmarked vehicle and taken to an unfamiliar location, it became clear that my nightmare had only just started. My husband, Nathaniel, the man I had trusted without question, was nowhere in sight. The journey felt endless. Time lost all meaning in the haze of fear and confusion that gripped me. I tried to speak, to demand an explanation, but every plea fell into silence. The interior of the van was sterile, with a strong chemical scent hanging in the air. The hum of the engine was the only sound as the world outside blurred into nothingness. Eventually, we came to a stop. The doors opened, revealing a towering, foreboding building encircled by a tall fence. A cold shiver swept over me. They held my arms tightly, leading me through the entrance as though I might run if given the chance. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was terribly wrong. The walls were painted a lifeless beige, and a mixture of disinfectant and something unpleasant lingered in the air. People in white coats hurried by, avoiding eye contact, as if acknowledging me would somehow make things worse. I raised my voice again, this time with desperation. I told them there had to be a mistake, that they were confusing me with someone else. But my words went unanswered. Instead, I was handed plain clothing and told to change. Confused and frightened, I obeyed. Shortly after, a tall man in a pristine white coat approached. He wore a calm expression that made my skin crawl. "Ms. Anderson, I'm Dr. Paul Reynolds," he said, offering a handshake I couldn't bring myself to accept. "I'm the director of this facility. I want you to know that you are safe here." His voice was even, almost comforting, but there was an eerie hollowness behind his eyes that sent a wave of unease through me. Safe? I felt anything but. What is this place? Why have I been brought here? I asked, my voice unsteady and cracking. He exhaled slowly, as though he had encountered this scenario many times before. "I understand that you're feeling disoriented, but please know this is all being done in your best interest," he replied, still not answering my question. "Your husband expressed serious concerns about your mental state after the loss of your father. He's genuinely worried about you, Charlotte." At the sound of Nathaniel's name, a deep chill spread through me. Worry? This wasn't concern, it was betrayal in its cruelest form. Not long ago, my life had felt nearly perfect. I had a devoted husband, a beautiful home, and the kind of comfort most people only imagine. My father, Joshua Anderson, had been everything to me. He raised me alone after my mother passed away when I was still a child. He had been more than just a parent. He was my foundation, the person who knew me best and loved me most. But that all vanished the day his private jet crashed without warning. I remember every second of the moment that shattered my life. I had been in the middle of preparing for a charity fundraiser, something my father would have been proud of, when my phone rang. "Ms. Anderson, we regret to inform you." The rest of the words dissolved as the blood drained from my face. My knees gave out, and I dropped into the closest chair. A crash. No one survived. It felt like something out of a nightmare, my father, my hero, gone forever. At the funeral, I stood beside Nathaniel, trying to keep myself together as an endless stream of condolences came from people I barely knew. Nathaniel's mother, Martha, clung tightly to my hand. Her face showed sorrow, but her grip was too strong, too deliberate, as if her sympathy was a performance. The sorrow overwhelmed me, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The reading of my father's will felt as cold as the marble floors beneath our feet. Surrounded by polished wood and serious expressions, I listened in a daze as the lawyer went through the details. Nathaniel sat by my side, quietly supportive, while the attorney delivered the life-altering news. "Charlotte, you are the sole heir to your father's estate," he announced in a composed voice. "Everything, his shares in Anderson Steel, every property, and each investment was now in my name." I remembered casting a glance toward Nathaniel, who offered a faint but encouraging smile. Then my eyes shifted to Martha, whose expression was impossible to decipher. The full burden of the Anderson legacy had suddenly been placed on me, and I barely had a moment to grieve before I was plunged into a whirlwind of corporate meetings, legal matters, and decisions I never signed up for. Now I found myself in a sterile, unwelcoming room within a mental health facility, completely lost as to how I ended up there. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the dull, lifeless beige walls around me. My mind raced with endless questions, yet not a single answer emerged. Dr. Reynolds' words played on an endless loop in my mind. "This is for your own good. Your husband is deeply concerned about you." Concerned? Nathaniel never breathed a word about any of this, and I couldn't understand how he could orchestrate something so serious without even talking to me first. Whenever I asked for clarification, I was met with the same empty phrase, "It's all in your best interest." Best interest? Did being confined here, stripped of communication and freedom, count as that? They had given me medication soon after I arrived, something they claimed would help me calm down. I tried to resist, but a nurse stood watch until I reluctantly swallowed the pills. It didn't take long before the fog set in. My limbs felt heavy, my thinking slowed, and a deep haze fell over me. It was as if I was being erased, bit by bit, through every dose. When I finally woke up, the first thing I noticed was the oppressive stillness. It wasn't the kind of silence that soothes, it was empty, cold, and unsettling. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a plain white room with only a narrow bed and a steel chair. The walls were barren, designed to strip away every trace of humanity. For a second, I hoped it was a dream, but the aches in my body reminded me it was all too real. My head throbbed, and my mouth was painfully dry, as if I hadn't had a drink in days. When I tried to sit up, my limbs barely obeyed, weak and unsteady, like I'd been asleep far longer than I realized. The air was sharp with disinfectant, tinged with a chemical bite, and the soft hum of some machine in the distance was the only sound that broke the silence. Anxiety started to rise within me. I looked around, desperate for anything familiar. A clock, a mirror, even a small window, but there was nothing. I called out, my voice barely above a whisper, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But all that came back was the empty echo of my own voice. The silence was suffocating. The longer I sat there, the more I felt a growing pressure in my chest. Fear gave way to anger, and before I knew it, I was on my feet, slamming my fists into the hard, unfeeling walls. "Let me out!" I cried, my voice cracking as I yelled. "What is this place? Someone, please tell me what's happening." My hands burned from the impact, but I couldn't stop. The confusion, the feeling of being betrayed, the helplessness, it all boiled over. I pounded on the door with everything I had left in me. I didn't even hear it open. Suddenly, a nurse appeared behind me, holding a syringe in one hand. Her expression was blank, mechanical. "Please remain calm, Ms. Anderson," she said in a monotone voice. I stumbled back, shaking my head, trying to get away. But she grabbed my arm with surprising strength and jabbed the needle into it before I could react. "No, don't." I cried out, but it was already done. The room began to spin, my knees buckled, and I collapsed. My final thought before everything went black was that this couldn't be real. It had to be a horrible dream. The following 2 weeks vanished in a blur. I only realized how much time had passed when I overheard 2 nurses talking about it. I spent most of my days floating in a medicated fog, barely conscious. The drugs dulled everything, my feelings, my thoughts, even my ability to sense the world around me. I stopped asking questions. The Charlotte who once fought for answers seemed to have faded into someone else entirely. Most of my waking moments were short. I'd open my eyes, eat the bland food placed in front of me, and drift off again. My dreams were disjointed and strange, faces melting into shadows, voices echoing as though underwater. Sometimes, Nathaniel would appear in them, but I could never tell whether it was real or just my desperate mind reaching for something, anything, to hold on to. Each time I regained consciousness, it felt like I was sinking deeper into something dark and inescapable. I wasn't really living anymore. I was simply there. And that thought was more terrifying than anything else. I watched her carefully, unsure whether she was genuinely trying to reach out or just playing some kind of game. Her eyes never flinched, steady and sharp, and there was a calculating calmness about her demeanor. Despite my confusion and caution, I was desperate. For the first time in weeks, someone was speaking to me as if I still mattered, as if I was more than just another sedated patient. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice strained and rough from disuse. Lily leaned in, lowering her voice until it was barely more than a whisper. "This place isn't just for those with mental illnesses," she murmured, her eyes scanning the room to make sure no one was paying attention. "People end up here because someone wants them out of the way. You really think you're the first?" Her words sent a wave of dread through my stomach, but before I could fully absorb what she'd said, she leaned back in her seat, acting like the conversation never happened. "You can choose to trust me, or you can sit here and waste away," she added nonchalantly, jabbing at a pitiful pile of carrots on her tray. Regardless of how risky she seemed, one thing was clear: she might be the only shot I had at escaping this nightmare. Later that same day, during our short free period in the common area, Lily approached me again. She dropped into the seat beside me and spoke in a relaxed tone, as though we were simply old friends catching up. "I've made it out before, just so you know," she said, absent-mindedly twirling a lock of her dark hair. I turned to her, trying to hide my surprise. "You've actually escaped?" I whispered, hardly believing it. With a faint smirk playing on her lips, she gave a small nod. "More than once. It's not as impossible as it seems. But they always catch up with me. The outside world isn't easy, and I start drawing attention after a few days. They drag me back, load me up with meds, and pretend I never left." Although her voice remained calm, I caught a trace of frustration in her eyes. Then she leaned closer and added, "But you're different. You don't belong here. And there's something about you they want to keep buried. That makes you dangerous to them, and that gives us an edge if we work together." She moved in even closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I got caught again just one day before you showed up," she confessed, her smirk disappearing. "I was so close. They found me just a few blocks away. Same old story. They hauled me back, drugged me, and locked me in isolation for a few days. But I've been observing the new guards since then. They're not nearly as sharp as the ones before." Her words made me raise an eyebrow. I was curious, but part of me still doubted her. "New guards?" I asked in a hushed voice, my nerves creeping in. She nodded, her dark eyes glimmering with resolve. "Yeah, especially the ones on the night shift. They're careless and often distracted. I've been watching how they operate during meals, during our free periods, and after lights out. I even know when the security cameras are actively monitored and when they're left unattended." She swept her gaze across the room, noting where the staff and other patients were. "If we time this right, they won't even realize what's happening." For the first time in what felt like forever, a spark of hope ignited within me. Over the next few days, we started building a plan in secret. Lily would whisper updates during meals or whenever we were in the common area and no one else was close by. Every detail counted, from when the night guards switched shifts, to which doors staff routinely left unlocked, and which path led quickest to the perimeter gate. "Timing is everything," she told me one evening, barely moving her lips as she stirred her tasteless soup. "If they catch us, we're finished. They'll up our meds and we won't get another shot." We settled on a night just 2 days away, during the quietest hours when staff was at their most inattentive. Lily would create a diversion near the nurse's station to draw attention away, while I used a keycard she had previously stolen to slip through the hallway unnoticed. Once the coast was clear, we'd rendezvous at the rear maintenance door, one she insisted hadn't been locked in months. "It's dangerous," she said seriously, the usual casual edge gone from her voice, "but it's the only real shot we've got." I gave a firm nod, though my throat felt tight. Calling it dangerous barely scratched the surface, but staying in this place wasn't an option. On the night we'd chosen, my heart was pounding so fiercely I could hear it echo in my ears. Everything was happening just as we'd planned. Lily pushed over a metal cart near the nurse's station, sending trays and medical supplies crashing loudly to the floor. The clatter echoed through the halls, and like clockwork, the guards rushed to the source of the commotion. I slipped out of the common room, clutching the stolen keycard tightly in my fist, its edges pressing into my palm. My legs felt unsteady from the meds still in my system, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I met Lily by the maintenance door. Her face was flushed, but her focus was unshakable. We had just made it halfway across the open yard toward the outer wall when the shouting began. "Stop them. They're escaping." My chest clenched, and I looked back to see 2 guards charging after us, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. Fear surged through me, but Lily grabbed my arm and pointed forward. "Keep moving. The wall's right there," she urged in a fierce whisper. There was no time to hesitate. I sprinted toward the looming barrier, my lungs burning and every step feeling heavier than the last. Reaching the wall, I clawed at its rough surface, forcing my arms to lift me even as they trembled from exhaustion. Behind me, I heard Lily shouting, "Don't stop, Charlotte. Keep going." My heart sank as I turned and saw her standing her ground, facing the guards head-on. She snatched a broken plank from the ground and swung it with all her might, creating just enough of a distraction for me to make a move. "Go," she yelled again, her voice slicing through the chaos. My lungs tightened as I reached the top of the wall, pulling myself up with every shred of energy I could muster. Just before I dropped down to the other side, I caught one last glimpse of Lily, fierce and unyielding, as the guards closed in. How I found the strength to scale that wall after days of being heavily sedated, I'll never understand. My entire body protested, my muscles burned, my head spun, and each movement felt like wading through molasses. But survival triggers something deep inside, something raw and instinctual. It's as if fear, urgency, and the sheer will to live override the exhaustion. My hands scraped against the gritty concrete, fingers burning as I hauled myself upward, inch by inch. Behind me, I could hear Lily grappling with the guards, her voice shouting at me to keep going. My arms ached like they might snap, and my legs were barely holding me up. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. With one last surge of effort, I flung myself over the wall and hit the ground hard on the other side. The jolt from the fall was rough, but I felt free. For the first time in weeks, the cool night breeze brushed against my skin. I had escaped, but Lily had stayed behind so I could get out. The following 48 hours were a fog of fear and utter exhaustion. I had no plan, no safe place to go, and no one I could trust. The city felt alien and harsh, every sound amplified by my paranoia. Each honk of a car or glimpse of a stranger felt like a warning bell, pushing me to disappear deeper into the shadows. I moved like a ghost, slipping through alleyways and hiding in empty buildings, always looking over my shoulder. The fear of being dragged back to that nightmarish institution haunted me. My body was still riddled with the effects of the medication. They dulled my senses and made my thoughts hazy. I scavenged what little food I could find, barely enough to calm the constant hunger. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone recognizing me, turning me in. I was free, but I felt more trapped than ever. My thoughts kept circling back to Lily. Was she safe? Had she been punished for helping me? The guilt gnawed at me, but I had to keep moving. I couldn't fall apart, not yet. After 2 days of wandering through the cold streets, desperation got the better of me. I needed help, and the only person I could think to turn to was Jonathan Sachs. But I knew I had to be smart. I couldn't just walk into his office and reveal myself. I'd scraped together enough change by sitting quietly with an old coffee cup near a busy intersection, my eyes lowered to avoid attention. It was humiliating, but it worked. I gathered enough coins to use a payphone. With trembling fingers, I dialed the main line for Anderson Steele. The receptionist picked up with a crisp, emotionless greeting. "Good morning, Anderson Steele. How may I direct your call?" I took a shaky breath and lied as smoothly as I could. "Hello, this is Anna Collins," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a former colleague of Jonathan Sachs. I need to speak with him right away." There was a brief pause, and my heart thudded in my chest. I imagined her questioning my story or hanging up. But instead, she responded with, "One moment, please," and I was placed on hold. I exhaled slowly, nerves still rattling. The line clicked again, and then I heard his voice. Jonathan Sachs. Calm, professional, just like I remembered from the few times he'd visited my father. "This is Jonathan Sachs," he said. I hesitated, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. "Jonathan," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's me, Charlotte." There was a pause, and I heard the soft shuffle of papers on the other end. "Charlotte," he finally said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Where have you been?" everyone thought. I quickly interrupted, not wanting him to say it. "I can't tell you where I am," I said, glancing behind me as if someone might be listening. "But I need your help. They locked me up, Jonathan. In a mental facility. They kept me drugged. They said I was a threat to myself, but that was a lie." My voice cracked as tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. It was Nathaniel and his mother. They're the ones who did this to me. When the line clicked and I heard Jonathan's voice again, calm, measured, I took a deep breath to steady myself. "Jonathan," I said quietly, my eyes scanning my surroundings, making sure no one was nearby. "It's Charlotte." There was a moment of silence, then I heard the hesitation in his reply. "Charlotte, where have you been?" everyone thought. I didn't let him finish. "I can't go into detail over the phone. I need you to meet me. Alone." He paused, and I could sense the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Charlotte, are you all right? What's happening?" Swallowing hard against the lump in my throat, I pushed on. "Please, Jonathan. Just meet me. And promise me, swear, that you won't tell Nathaniel or Martha." There was another pause, this one noticeably longer, before he finally responded in a resigned tone. "All right, where should we meet?" Jonathan showed up at the park just as the sun dipped low, bathing the area in golden light and stretching long shadows over the deserted benches. I kept out of sight behind a large tree, watching from afar to ensure he hadn't brought anyone along. When I finally emerged, his expression turned ghostly pale. "Charlotte," he murmured, barely audible, filled with disbelief. You look. What happened to you?" I gestured for him to sit down beside me, too emotionally drained to respond right away. We chose a bench tucked away from the main walkway, where even the faint sound of children playing seemed distant and hollow to me. "They took everything," I started, my voice shaky as I struggled to hold myself together. "Nathaniel and Martha, this is all they're doing. After my father passed, they manipulated things to have me declared mentally unfit. They locked me away in a facility, Jonathan. I was drugged and imprisoned for weeks." I forced down the lump in my throat, blinking back tears. "And the most horrifying part? They vanished. Not one call, no visits, no explanation. It's like I never mattered. Like I was disposable. They tossed me aside like garbage, Jonathan. Like I was nobody." Jonathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, clearly trying to make sense of everything I had just shared. "But why would they do this to you?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and suppressed fury. "Nathaniel cared about you, or at least I thought he did. And Martha? What could drive her to something this extreme?" I shook my head slowly, gripping the bench with such force that my knuckles turned pale. "That's what I need to uncover," I said, my voice steadier now. "It can't just be about the inheritance, or at least, I don't think so. They wanted me gone, completely out of the picture. But what for? Why go to such terrifying lengths?" I turned to him, hoping he could see how urgent this was in my eyes. "I need your help, Jonathan. You are close to my father, and you know the ins and outs of the business better than anyone else. If anyone can help me figure this out, it's you." Jonathan leaned back slowly and exhaled, taking a few moments to absorb everything. Then, without a hint of hesitation, he nodded. Okay, he said firmly. I believe you, Charlotte. And if what you're telling me is real, and I believe it is, then we don't have a moment to spare. You need to be somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look. He scanned the park subtly, checking for any watching eyes. I've got a small place outside the city. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet retreat I go to when I need peace. You can stay there while we get to the bottom of this. A sense of relief washed over me, though it was mingled with deep exhaustion. I followed him to his car, keeping my head low as we made our way out of the park. The ride was silent for the most part, with Jonathan glancing over at me from time to time, worry clearly etched into his expression. When we arrived, the place was exactly how he had described, simple, tucked away, and private. It's not much, he said, unlocking the door and guiding me inside. But it's safe. I'll bring you food, clothes, anything you need. I gave a faint nod, too tired to speak much, but his kindness felt like a fragile light after weeks of darkness. The next morning brought a slight shift. I woke up feeling marginally stronger. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I wasn't anxiously looking over my shoulder or hiding in fear. The room Jonathan had prepared was plain but welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal walls of the institution I'd been trapped in. I stretched carefully, every muscle still sore from the constant stress, but my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. Jonathan arrived not long after, carrying a grocery bag and looking more focused than ever. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, he said as he set the bag on the counter. I reached out to someone I trust, a friend of mine, a private investigator. I gave him the basics, and he agreed to help us. We need to uncover exactly what Nathaniel and Martha did, who was involved, and most importantly, why. His tone was composed, but I noticed the concern in his eyes. This won't be easy, Charlotte. But if there's a trail, we'll follow it. For the first time in many days, a flicker of genuine hope sparked inside me. I wasn't alone anymore, and I wasn't going to let Nathaniel and Martha get away with what they'd done. 1 week later, the front door creaked open, and Jonathan walked in with a serious, purposeful expression. A tall man stepped in behind him, carrying himself with quiet confidence. He looked like he had stepped out of an old detective film, sharp eyes, calm demeanor, and a weathered leather briefcase in hand. Jonathan introduced him. Charlotte, this is David Harper, the private investigator I told you about. David, meet Charlotte. David placed his briefcase on the small kitchen table and opened it with practiced ease. Ms. Anderson, he began, his tone professional, I've spent the past week gathering everything I could about your case. He pulled out a thick collection of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. What I found is far more disturbing than we anticipated. The extent of their efforts to erase what they did is remarkable and alarming. He spread out the first set of papers, all stamped with official seals and marked with various signatures. That document right there, he said, gesturing toward a medical file, is a fake psychiatric assessment. He explained that Nathaniel and Martha had arranged for a psychiatrist, Dr. Evelyn Marks, to create a falsified report. The document falsely claimed that I had become a threat to myself after my father's passing and required immediate psychiatric treatment. I stared at the paper, nausea coiling in my gut. How could they possibly make this believable? I was grieving, yes, but still completely sound in mind. David's expression was grim as he nodded. They knew grief alone wouldn't justify what they did. So they embellished your behavior, describing signs of paranoia, wild mood fluctuations, even self-injury. None of it was ever verified, but that report laid the groundwork for everything that followed. He pushed another sheet across the table. This here is the fast-tracked court order. It was signed by Judge Leonard Grayson, a name I've come across more than once in questionable investigations. He accepted a bribe to rush the order through, avoiding the standard procedures. Jonathan stood quietly against the wall, arms folded tightly, his face darkening with every sentence. David kept going, pulling out a different folder filled with additional records. Once that order was approved, it went straight to the facility where you were sent. The place is run by Dr. Paul Reynolds and his associates, who are infamous for quietly housing high-profile cases. For years, they've accepted bribes to keep individuals hidden and controlled. He laid a photo in front of me, Reynolds and Nathaniel shaking hands at what looked like a discreet, private meeting. "This picture was taken 3 days before you were admitted," he said. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for the photo, my fingers trembling. "Nathaniel." "This was orchestrated, carefully and deliberately." "They planned all of it," I murmured, barely able to get the words out. David nodded again. "Not only did they plot every move, but they also ensured you would remain under heavy sedation. That way, if anyone ever came to visit, you'd appear disoriented, incapable of asking for help." He tapped yet another document, a payment ledger. "This is the financial trail. Nathaniel wired $250,000 to Dr. Reynolds the day after you were institutionalized. That amount secured your silence." My chest tightened. I couldn't catch my breath. The betrayal hit like a wave, knocking the air from my lungs. "And Martha?" I asked, my voice hoarse. David's eyes narrowed. "She played a major role. Correspondence between her and Nathaniel shows she was the one who encouraged it. She convinced him that removing you was the only way to gain full control of the Anderson estate." Then he showed me one final piece of evidence, email exchanges among Nathaniel, Martha, and Dr. Marks. They had planned every step meticulously, inventing the diagnosis, bribing a judge, and making sure I stayed drugged indefinitely. David sighed. "They were thorough," he admitted. "But they didn't anticipate 2 things, your strength and my team's determination to unravel their lies." Jonathan finally broke his silence. "Charlotte, this is enough to bring them down. With what we've gathered, not only can we prove their crimes, we can make sure they're punished for every bit of it." His voice was steady, but the fury beneath it was clear. I looked down at the collection of damning evidence, undeniable proof of just how far they had gone to erase me from my own life. My fear slowly shifted into something else, something fierce and unyielding. A force that had been stirring since the day I broke free. It was resolve. "They thought they could erase me," I said firmly, my voice calm despite the chaos swirling within. "But they're about to realize just how wrong they were." Once Jonathan and David were gone, silence settled over the house once more. I remained seated at the kitchen table, the stack of documents still in front of me. I gently traced the corner of a photo, Nathaniel clasping hands with Dr. Reynolds. The image looked like a distant memory, as though I were peering into someone else's life. Nathaniel. His name echoed in my mind like a melody I couldn't stop hearing. How could someone I had loved so completely, someone who had comforted me during the darkest days after my father's death, be capable of something so cold and heartless? Images of our past together came rushing back, the joyful moments, the promises we had exchanged, the way he used to look at me like I was everything he had ever wanted. Had any of it been sincere? Or was every smile, every tender word, just part of an elaborate plan manipulated by his cunning mother? I buried my face in my hands, tears finally slipping free. It wasn't just about the betrayal, it was the cruel precision with which they had torn my world apart. To them, I wasn't even a person. I was just something in the way. The next morning, Jonathan showed up at the small house earlier than usual. His expression was tense, but a determined energy surrounded him. "Charlotte," he said, motioning toward the table, "come sit with me. We need to talk." David and I met with the authorities last night. After going through the gathered evidence, they confirmed our case was solid enough to justify taking both Nathaniel and Martha into custody without delay. I stared at him, struggling to absorb the weight of his words. "So, it's really going to happen?" I murmured, my voice just above a whisper. He gave a steady nod. "Yes. Arrest warrants for both of them have already been issued. Law enforcement is working together to ensure they're both detained at the same time. It'll be quiet but efficient." A rush of relief swept over me, quickly followed by a wave of anxiety. The hope that justice might finally be served clashed with the dread of everything that would come next. I took a slow breath. "What's going to happen to them now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jonathan leaned in, speaking with quiet assurance. "They'll be brought in for questioning first. Once that happens, the evidence we've compiled will speak volumes on its own. He stood up to leave and gave me a look as he walked toward the door. By the way, he added in a calm but resolute tone, there are already officers monitoring the mansion. If either Nathaniel or Martha tries to escape, they won't get far. Once Jonathan was gone, I sat frozen, staring at my phone as time dragged by, the enormity of it all pressing down on me. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in any longer. With hands shaking, I picked up the phone and dialed Nathaniel's number. It rang twice before he answered. "It's over, Nathaniel," I said, the firmness in my voice surprising even me. There was a moment of stunned silence before his voice came through, tentative and surprised. "Charlotte? Is that really you? I've been so worried. Where are you? Are you all right?" I didn't let him draw me in. "Don't pretend, Nathaniel," I said coldly, steel edging every word. "I didn't call to hear more lies. I know everything now." He paused before replying, his tone cautious, but laced with unease. "I'm not sure what you're talking about. You've been through so much lately, and people have been looking for you. I've been worried." "Worried?" I scoffed, my grip tightening around the phone. "You mean afraid I'd break free? Afraid I'd uncover the truth you and your mother buried so well? The false diagnosis, the bribes, the sedation, all of it. You tried to erase me." Nathaniel started to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. "Save your excuses. I've seen the evidence. I know about the payments to the clinic and the documents you signed to keep me hidden and quiet. It's over. Everything is out in the open." There was another pause, then he spoke, his voice shaking slightly. "Charlotte, I didn't know what else to do. It wasn't meant to turn out like this. Martha said we were helping you. After your father passed, you weren't yourself. I thought." "Helping me?" I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "You call drugging me and locking me away helping? You took my life away. You didn't help, you abandoned me." I didn't want to lose everything, he snapped suddenly, the calm slipping from his voice. "Martha told me if you were declared unfit, we could control the estate until you recovered. I thought it would only be for a little while. I thought." "You thought I'd be grateful?" I interrupted, my anger spilling over. "Be honest, Nathaniel. You never had any plans to give it back. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about control. About greed. Just admit it." "No," he shouted, desperation breaking through. "I loved you, Charlotte. I still do. I never meant to hurt you. Martha kept saying this was the only way. She pushed, and I gave in. I was weak, okay? I thought I was doing what I had to do." "Stop using her as a shield," I snapped, my voice thick with emotion. "You were the one who signed those papers. You approved those payments. You stood by and did nothing while I was sedated and hidden away. Don't you dare push the blame onto her. For once, take responsibility." His voice cracked. "I didn't know it would go that far. I thought it would be short-term. I didn't think they'd drug you like that. I didn't know you'd." His voice faded, overwhelmed by the weight of what he had done. "You didn't know?" I repeated bitterly. "No, you just didn't want to know. You turned your back on me because standing up would have cost you something. But now the truth is out, and you're going to have to face the consequences." He barely whispered now. "Charlotte, I swear, I'll make it right. I'll tell them everything. I'm going to the authorities. Just believe me, please. I never stopped loving you." "Loving me?" I repeated, my voice like ice. "If this is what love means to you, then I want no part of it. You and Martha ruined everything, Nathaniel. There's no repairing what you've broken." For a few seconds, silence hung between us, broken only by the sound of his shaky breath. "Charlotte," he finally said, his voice barely holding together. "I'm sorry. I don't know what else I can say." "You can say it to the police," I replied, my tone firm and detached. Before he could get another word in, I ended the call. My hand lingered over the receiver for a moment, then I exhaled shakily. It wasn't closure in the full sense, but it was enough for the moment. The following morning, I stood quietly across the street from the grand house that had once been my home. I watched as police officers filled the property, their flashing lights dancing across the windows and bathing the mansion in a surreal, strobing glow. My heart thundered in my chest as I saw them ascend the steps with purposeful strides, their knock at the door firm and assertive. Soon, the door opened. There they were, Nathaniel and Martha. Nathaniel looked as if the very life had drained from him. The confidence he once carried had completely crumbled. As officers moved to restrain him, cuffing his wrists behind his back, he glanced around wildly, as if hoping to find an escape in the sea of onlookers. Then his eyes found me. The moment he saw me, he stiffened. "Charlotte," he cried out, desperation tearing through his voice. "Please, just let me explain." He made an effort to move toward me, but the officers held him back. I remained still, expressionless. I didn't flinch or react. My gaze was fixed, cold, unreadable. I refused to grant him even a flicker of the emotional response he so clearly wanted. His voice grew more desperate, more strained, as they guided him toward the patrol car. "Charlotte, I love you. Don't do this, please." His pleas became more distant as he was placed in the back seat. Martha, however, stood with an air of defiant calm. Her head was held high, and her expression gave nothing away. Even as she was handcuffed, she kept her composure. Not once did she look my way. Her silence spoke louder than words, and her pride still clung to her like armor. But pride wouldn't protect her from what was coming. Her cold confidence would crack eventually. As the police vehicles pulled away, carrying both of them toward justice, a whirlwind of emotions stirred inside me: relief, sorrow, fury, and something else I couldn't quite place. I turned around and started walking, never glancing back. They had tried to erase me, to tear down everything I was, but they had failed. I was still here, still whole, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe.